Today, we're delighted to have Adam Cook join us today for our second podcast to speak about secure component verification. Thanks for joining us today, Adam. Why don't you start by telling us a little bit about your background in security and what your responsibilities are at Dell?
Yeah, thanks for having me. So before I was at Dell, I did about 11 years in the U.S. Air Force, where I focused primarily on cyberspace operations, electronic warfare, and strategy. When I entered the private sector, I started working at a startup that focused on leveraging virtual ranges built in VMware to assess cyber risk, do wargaming, train employees, and whatnot. And then joined Dell fairly recently, I guess, by Dell standards, within the last year, where I am a product manager and I focus on security solutions within ISG.
Great. So tell us, what is secure component verification and why is it beneficial in securing the supply chain?
So I think these days, supply chain can be a bit of a dirty word, depending on what you're talking about. Ever since, I guess, the 2020 started. So supply chain security is becoming more and more of an issue as the supply chain is both constrained from, I think, a material and resource aspect, as well as from a security aspect, like everybody saw with SolarWinds. So secured component verification is part of our supply chain security solution. And so when I look at the supply chain, I like to think of it in three phases, right? So you have the sourcing of components, the assembling of those components into the solution, and then shipping that to the customer. SCV fits mostly into the last part of that, shipping it to the customer, but it does reach through all other phases of the supply chain. SCV does that, or rather secures the supply chain by taking a cryptographic inventory of the components inside of a PowerEdge server. And then we keep a copy of that. We ship the device to the customer, and then they use their key to verify the components at their end, which then is compared to Dell's, and then it produces an output that says which parts are a match or a mismatch if something was tampered with along the way.
Many of our audience members may not be familiar with this type of security. So how does security component verification work at a high level?
Sure. So secured component verification, or SCV, at a high level works by first, the server is assembled in the facility, at a Dell facility. Then we take an inventory of all the components within that server. We cryptographically create a certificate of those components, and then we store that certificate on our end. We then ship the server out to the customer, where they then run a tool in the pre-boot environment, which then runs basically the same check on their end, creates a certificate that they use their key to verify against the one at Dell. And then that produces a list for them that says which parts are a match or a mismatch, depending on what arrived.
Great, wonderful. What are the potential threats to the supply chain if secure component verification is not available?
So there are a number of different threats in the supply chain. When you're looking at hardware security, the two most common threats you're going to be looking at are counterfeit components, which is more and more prevalent as supplies are constrained in a modern environment, but also malicious components, components that may be a one-for-one swap from what left the Dell factory, but may have malware embedded on it. You can look for that type of threat coming from nation state actors or APTs, and that level of threat and the security that we provide for that kind of depends on what the customer's threat landscape is looking like and what they're doing.
Wow, that's not something we often think about. Is it available for all of Dell's appliances within the server?
So SCV is currently available on powered servers that are 14G through current, but we understand the value that the solution brings within the supply chain risk management scope of security. And so I think customers should stay tuned to look for SCV popping up across the Dell Technologies portfolio.
Can you give examples of attacks that could have been prevented if secure component verification was available?
Unfortunately, in this format, I cannot give specific examples of attacks this has thwarted or not thwarted. But I think it's important to mention that this tool exists to counter known threats in the space. And this tool serves to further increase Dell's already industry-leading supply chain security controls.
That's great information. Thanks. Now our listeners know how supply chain attacks can impact an organization. And given that, is Dell the only vendor with secure component verification? If not, how does Dell measure up to the competition?
Dell's the industry leader in this space, and we look to leverage our lead position to continue to deliver innovative solutions to our customers that they can get even more and more value out of SCV in the future across the Dell Technologies portfolio.
Excellent. Thanks, Adam, for the wonderful discussion on secure component verification. We certainly got a better perspective into a type of security that is not often considered and that is recognized by the NSA for its efforts in securing the supply chain. Now I'll kick it back off to Saban to close us out.
Well, thank you, Adam. I really do appreciate you coming on. I hope you enjoyed our conversation. Thank you, Shakita, for bringing Adam on board. And we hope to see you soon, Adam.
Awesome. Thank you so much.